Today's 16-bit superhero game is a 1995 title for the Sega Genesis called Comix Zone, which was made and published by Sega and actually patented by Sega back in the day because it employs something so incredibly cool. You actually play through panels within a comic book. You play a comic book artist named Sketch, and you are sucked in by lightning, kind of Flash style, into the pages of a comic book by this evil character named Mortis, who is wanting to destroy the world within the book, but also our world as well. You meet up with this woman named Alyssa Cyan, and you go along this adventure where you have to take on all kinds of bad guys, beat them up, and punch them through different panels of the pages of the book that you have drawn. And what's interesting is you see a hand will pop up and sketch out different elements that you are then going to have to be challenged by, whether they're puzzles that you have to solve or bad guys that you have to punch into oblivion. It's a bit limited. It's certainly not as in-depth in terms of gameplay and diversity as something like Earthworm Jim or X-Men 2 Clone Wars, but it is still loaded with awesome eccentricities and originality. You know, the sense of humor, the fact that you pack around this little rat and you put him out of your pocket and he runs around and, you know, will solve a puzzle for you or click a switch or something and a fan will stop and you'll be able to punch a fan and get through an area. The environments that you enter into don't scroll that much because it's all sort of confined to panels, but the panels are all differently sized. So sometimes they'll be like set up on a page, so they'll be a little bit more vertical. Sometimes they'll be a little bit more horizontal, like you'll get into like this tournament panel where you got to beat up a bunch of bad guys or something. Sometimes there will be obstructions and doorways and things that you either have to detonate and explode, or you have to punch your way through, or you have to defeat a bunch of bad guys in order for something to be tripped so you can continue along your way. Making the jumps is a little bit nerve-wracking because one of the things that's endemic with this title is the fact that it's incredibly difficult. You get one life, and it's not an especially long game, so you can get all the way through it, but you have to be judicious. There's a health power-up that you can pick up every once in a while, like this little juice that will give you a little extra health energy. But it's easy to fall to your doom. It's also fairly easy to be sandwiched in a specific area within the pages of this comic, this video game comic, and you'll find yourself sort of tripped up and bounced back and forth by other bad guys beating you, and you'll see your health bar tip down, and boom, you gotta start the whole thing over again. A little bit frustrating. It would be great if there were checkpoints. It would be great if this was a bigger game. But still, this game represents unbelievable cleverness and terrific design. It's still fun to play, and it just looks and feels and sounds so damn cool. Even the way the Sega logo comes up and he's Sega! Sega! It's got an unbelievable charm about it. It is incredibly imaginative. It blew my freaking mind back in 1995. But of course, this is one of those late-stage 16-bit titles where all of our eyes in the video game universe were focused on PlayStation, Squirrel, you know, and Saturn, and the inevitable N64. We're all kind of, you know, moving away from the idea of 16-bit. And it's so unfortunate, even though this is a game that has been re-released, you know, most recently on the Sega Genesis Mini, but it's in lots of the collections that Sega has released over the years. You can play this on the PC in different ways. I'm sure you can play it on modern consoles. They even released it for the phones. So it's been around, and Sega clearly loves this title, and I love this title too. I find that it's the first one. I talked about this in our recent Sega Genesis First 5 video, but it's one of those Sega Genesis games, wherever I see it pop up, whether it's on the phone or it's on a, you know, collection, or I see it pop up in an online store or something, I grab it and I play it immediately, much like I play Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. I've purchased Super Metroid so many times, and I've purchased Comix Zone so many times, and I think it's because they're such great both of those titles, even though they're very different from each other, both of those titles kind of represent some of the best that 16-bit had to offer, and those specific respective consoles as well. Super Metroid is one of the best things that you can play off of Super Nintendo, and Comix Zone, for my money, is one of the best things that you can play on the Sega Genesis. It's one of the most special Sega Genesis cartridges I played out there, and it's a little bit, it's not an out-and-out superhero game. It's, when you defeat a level, he sort of transforms into a superhero.
Well done,
Oh yeah! But for the most part, it's a regular, tough comic book writer, artist that gets sucked into the world. But I put it into this category because it's just so evocative of my love for comic books and this genre and this series, this 16-bit superhero series. So, long story short, get this freaking game. It's amazing. Play it. There's a million different ways that you can play it. It's one of my favorite 16-bit games of all time. Even though it isn't perfect and it isn't as robust and immensely satisfying as some of my best in this particular series have been, I still love this game. Comix Zone gets a 9 out of 10 from me.